This podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp. After experiencing trauma, I went to therapy, and my therapist guided me through a difficult time in my life. They helped me understand what was happening and provided me with tools to cope and find my own strength and resilience. Their experience and compassion were invaluable and enabled me to rebuild my life and move forward. I strongly believe in the power of therapy to help people through difficult times. BetterHelp connects you with a licensed therapist who is trained to listen and give you helpful, unbiased advice. First, you go to their site. You can use my link, betterhelp.com/resilience. You answer a few questions, and BetterHelp will match you to a professional who has years of experience helping people with struggles just like yours. Let BetterHelp connect you to a therapist who can support you, all from the comfort of your own home. Visit betterhelp.com/resilience or choose podcast, then notes on resilience during sign up and enjoy a special discount on your first month.
What I think is a struggle is the underlying factors that you see where how the organization operates in times of stress, how the leaders show up, and it's real easy to revert back to like that command and control traditional methodology.
Hello, and welcome to Notes on Resilience. I'm your host, Manya Chelinsky. My guest today is Rob Ott. He is an executive coach and a consultant, and we talked about compassion and leadership through the lens of dealing with a crisis, building a positive work culture, and making sure you're communicating effectively. I think you're really going to enjoy this episode. Rob, I am so excited to talk with you on the podcast today. Thank you for being here.
And thank you for having me, Mine. It's always great to connect with you.
Before we dive into the topic, what is one thing that you have done in any area of your life that you never thought you would do?
I love this question. That's really interesting because it makes me think of things that are kind of outside my zone. This one requires just a smidgen of setup. If people that know me will know that I am like a consummate planner. I have lists. I'm the kid who reads the Lego instructions. So, I don't do things that are kind of out of the ordinary. And for my 50th birthday, I got a tattoo. And so but that's not the really surprising thing. What is I just went and sat in the chair and said to the artist that I love what you do. Just draw me a dragon, and had no sketch, no idea, nothing. And I had no idea what I was going to get. And it was kind of a liberating experience. And I think that even when I came home to my wife, she looked at me like, are you crazy? Like, did you get switched? Like there was no, so it was a really great experience. And it helped me push a boundary that, I don't have to plan everything.
Wow. So listeners cannot see the look of shock and surprise on my face when you said that. That to me, that doesn't feel like a thing to just throw to the wind and trust, a permanent mark on your body. Wow.
Yeah, it was really out of character for me.
Wow. That's some serious trust right there, buddy.
Yeah, he's a good artist, and I wanted to trust his process, so gave him free reign. And I was really happy with the outcome. Like it was really great.
That's wonderful. That is definitely out there. I've not heard anything like that yet. So thank you for sharing.
Yeah, you're welcome.
To dive into the topic of compassionate leadership, first of all, what does that term mean to you?
When I think of compassionate leadership, I think people of putting people first, and human focus on your processes. I think I can define it also by what I wouldn't call it. I mean, there's a lot of associations with psychological safety, but it's not just being nice. It's really thinking about, do your policies, does your leadership style, does your focus really focus on the person and being compassionate about their situation in the pursuit of your objectives in your business. So there's a balance of it all, that I think is really important.
Yes, balance being a key word. I feel sometimes that when we talk about the concept of compassion in the workplace or accepting the whole human who shows up as our employee, that there's a fear that that means becoming this touchy-feely workforce, or we're all going to sit around in circles and share our feelings with each other. And that couldn't be further from the truth.
No, I agree. I am at my heart an entrepreneur. And so that goes with a lot of long hours, hard work, and, drive that you have to be successful. And what I found in my career is that you can do that and do it successfully while still focusing on your people first. We always used to have a mantra at the company that I co-founded with a couple of colleagues of mine, in that, if you take care of your people and you take care of your projects, the clients usually come right along after that, and everybody's served, and your whole operation elevates. So while we always wanted to calibrate and be able to keep the lights on tomorrow and come back and do this again, we wanted to do it in a way that was as humane and focused on people as we possibly could. And because that was really what made a difference for us. And we built a culture that I love to talk about. I was actually just talking to someone the other day who I used to work with, and by and large, they say it was one of the best places they ever worked in their career. And that's something I'm really proud of.
Yes, that is something to be proud of. So many of us have the experience of being in a work environment that we wanted to or were able to run from, and would not recommend somebody work for that company for various reasons. One question I get asked a lot is, how do you measure this? And especially if you're having some initiatives or you're having some training, how do you show that you're actually making a difference when these are things that are in some ways fundamentally unmeasurable?
Yeah. It's hard because, what I've found is it's a measure of qualitative and quantitative. You can't just throw up a KPI that will give you the exact answer that you're looking for. So there's not one answer to it, but there are ways to look at it. I mean, on the subjective side, there's always the employee satisfaction surveys. If you structure them well, you can get a lot of the signals that are going on in your organization to see what's happening. So we would take that not just at a surface level, we would really dig into that and look for trends. On the other side, we would also look at is some of our turnover rates. I mean, there's a degree of turnover that's good. I mean, that's a healthy churn, but there's also trends that could be happening, and so the turnover may not be effective for the people that are leaving, but if you're picking up on reasons why people are leaving, or certain areas of a company that seems to have a higher turnover than others, that tells you how that could be a signal. It's not the end all be all always. And then, the other things that you can look at are the decision making practices in the company. How are they made? How are they made? And like, what are their outcomes? Another one that I think was useful, and again, this falls on the subjective side, but we would do after action exercises when either a project was successful or ended or whatever it may be. And in the instances where it wasn't successful or something failed, you can always pick up if there's somebody, if you've got a culture of blame or a culture of learning and growth. And almost the tone of that meeting will tell you if you're on the right track or not when it comes to compassion, psychological safety, and what I would consider a much more positive growth environment.
Right. That's interesting. You mentioned the culture of blame, and that I think is a clear indicator. I'm thinking as you were saying these, that a lot of these metrics, whether they're subjective or objective, are lagging indicators. They show what you did, and they're not giving you a clue to whether or not you're headed in the right direction. Is there anything for leaders to be looking at that can say we are headed in the right direction?
Yeah, that one's a really tough one because you're dealing with theoreticals. I would think that the types of questions that you get if you have a good feedback loop, this may not be a totally leading indicator, but if you've got a good feedback loop that gets you answers, either not so much in a survey, but in maybe a town hall meeting or a strategy session, those types of questions will, but it's not so much the questions themselves, it's how the questions are asked. So if you're seeing the same questions from the same group of people, that might be an indicator that you don't have a wide open receiving loop. And so what I would say is that if you're getting questions from a diversified group of people, and I'm not speaking just purely, racial, gender, but if it's a, like, from all parts of the organization and everybody seems to be engaged, that is a good indicator that you're on the right track. I don't know if you can do predictive indicator metrics, but you don't have to rely completely on things that lag, and that may be too late to fix.
You work now as a consultant and an executive coach. The folks that you're talking with, the leaders, are you hearing concern about employee engagement, about compassion, something that would give you an idea that this is something they're actively thinking about these days?
It comes to me in two different ways. Some and it really is dependent upon the level of self-awareness of the leader to themselves and to their organization. Because, I don't think it's hard for leaders to make the connection between generally happy employees and a good culture and a good environment with increased productivity and all the other good metrics that go along with that. What I think is a struggle is the underlying factors that you see, where how the organization operates in times of stress, how the leaders show up, and it's real easy to revert back to like that command and control traditional methodology. And so I will deal with leaders that are interested in implementing this and are like maybe a little bit further along on the chain, versus people have no idea, and they really need to be, they really need to surface those issues and then see the impact that they're having on their organization or their team's culture or whatever it may be that they're dealing with.
Yes. You said something I want to dive into a little bit. You mentioned how leaders behave in a crisis. And it takes me back to, I've heard different versions of this. In a crisis, when we're tested, we don't rise to the level of our goals or our dreams or our aspirations. We fall to the level of our training or our habits. And to me, that talks about how important it is to train and prepare and work on this ahead of time. But I don't think companies see the imperative to working on this ahead of time until they're tested.
Well, I mean, the test is a wake up call for sure. I mean, so that'll do that. My father used to say pressure reveals character. And so you have this in two different aspects. And I think that, as I think of what you had just said, you have the effect on the leader when you're under stress, and then you have the effect on the organization and their systems. So if their systems aren't designed to either flex or, absorb the stress and continue to deliver, then that's a systemic problem, and that has a remedy that you have to start looking at and to implement, put a plan in place for that. But the other part of it is the leader, because if the leader tenses up and reverts, like I said, to command and control, that may not be the best answer. One of the other things that I live by is it's always situational. I mean, you got the classic example of the house is on fire. I don't need to get a committee together. I need somebody to take command, get everybody out of the building, and then deal with it. But how you look at that situation after that will also reveal a lot about your leadership. Are you going to blame somebody for knocking over a lamp or a candle, or are you going to say, how do we make sure this never happens again and build the organization to be stronger?
Right. Well, what do you think are the policies or structures that are necessary to support that compassionate decision making and forward looking? What can we learn from this versus who do we blame for this?
Think that there's a lot to be said about the emotional intelligence. There's so many different ways to answer this question. This is a really good one. The emotional intelligence of your leadership team, starting with empathy and looking at where things may have broken down, not in a blame way, but like examining your systems, but understanding there are people in those systems and taking that human approach to it to say, you could design a perfect system and it still could have human error incorporated into it. So looking at that, saying, all right, let's look at it from the lens of the system, and then let's add the lens of people. Is it flexible enough to accommodate all the different people that are going to touch the system? Is it going to serve its purpose when you start to add a little bit of variation in there? And I struggle to think of a specific system that would apply to this, but I think that looking at flexibility, at how are we treating our people under stress? Are they stressed out all the time? People under stress make mistakes. So if you don't have good support, mental health, aspects. If you're overworking your teams, if your culture is one of continuous burnout or crisis, there were times in my career where I felt like we lurched from crisis to crisis, and you never got a chance to even do a really good after action exercise because you were on to the next big thing. And that will burn you out in ways that you can't imagine. So you have to take those pauses and look at, what is it doing to my people? What is it doing to my culture? And that has to be like one of the first things you think about, not the last.
Yes. And you said something about people's inability to focus when they're under stress. In fact, when we're under stress or we're dealing with heightened emotions, it is more difficult. It is biologically more difficult to hear information and to retain it. And even if you want that information and you're looking for it and you're asking somebody for it, when you've got certain levels of stress and burnout and you're dealing with that, no matter how much you want, you're not going to be able to retain a lot of that information, which goes into what you were talking about, how that's going to impact productivity. And if you're lurching from crisis to crisis, are you ever able to communicate effectively?
Well, and I think that's one of the absolute keys. And I am thinking about a specific time in my career where we were in a crisis for probably a good 6 months. We had, there's some proprietary stuff, so I don't want to go into all the details of it, but operations were interrupted across the organization. And we really focused primarily on communication. And I was on that crisis management team, and part of my job was to debrief all the department heads twice a day on what happened last night, because we were working around the clock, what happened by the end of the day, and then rinse and repeat. But everybody got to a point where we were keeping them looped in on just whatever progress we were able to make to resolve the situation, because they had constituents that they needed to address. And one of the things that someone said to me after that was they stopped coming because of two things. One, they knew they could get the information anytime they needed it because our communication was so good. And two, they trusted us because they saw the cadence of, you're doing something every day, all day long, that they knew progress was being made. So they would stop checking in every twice a day and they'd come once, or they'd come, because we would also post minutes and, like we had multiple channels of communication. And that was gratifying. I mean, after we were able to kind of catch our breath and stop and think, we realized that we had a good plan, it was focused on the people, and we executed it the way we needed to. And it wasn't a fun experience, but it could have been a lot worse, I think, if we didn't do the things that we did.
Yes. You said some interesting words, crisis plan. You had a plan in place at whatever depth or detail that helped shape how you responded, it sounds like. And I think it can be easy to believe you don't necessarily need a crisis plan. And I think more and more companies are. This is part of the process. But I think it's easy to just assume that everything's fine and going to basically be fine.
Yeah, and it's dangerous.
And not think you have to put that time in to plan for it.
Yeah, and one of the things that I walked away as a lesson learned from that, it's that old maxim: a plan is only good until either the first shot is fired, or Mike Tyson had this like great line about somebody punches you. It's great to have a plan until you get punched in the face. And that's true, because the plans have to be so flexible that you don't know what you're actually going to be running into in a crisis. But fundamentally, there's a professor that I used to take classes from, Paul Argenti from Dartmouth, and he's a crisis communicator. He's brilliant. And he was always key on the fundamentals. Keep that communication flowing, because you don't know what you're going to be communicating. You don't know what the events of the day are going to be, but building that cadence. And that's the stuff that stuck with me when we were navigating that situation. And I think the good crisis management people know that, and that's what they implement. They have a plan. They know what they want to do, but then they're able to adjust and flex as they go through their resolutions.
Thank you for sharing that, Rob. What do you think is the biggest risk organizations face if they don't embrace at least some elements of the concept of compassionate leadership?
I think the biggest one really focuses on the people. When you think about, the economy and where we're heading and where we've been heading for like the last 25, 30 years, America, at least in the States, and I'm going to speak kind of centrally from my experience, we're a knowledge economy, so really we're not manufacturing the majority of things, we're working with our employees and their knowledge. So if they leave, and if you aren't building to some degree, a company of choice for the talent's going to go somewhere. And so one of the things that when I started ACT Oncology 25 years ago, we were one of the first companies that were virtual. And we had a philosophy that let's hire the talent where it is rather than within 25 square miles of the headquarters or something like that. So we had people in California. If you had a laptop and a reliable internet connection, you were set. And so what that did was for a long time, we were like, hey, you can work from home. That was a huge benefit for us that people were attracted to. And we pulled in a tremendous amount I used to say we assembled our dream team because we were able to find people that, like, if I needed a quality, a compliance person, I was like, I got to go find my friend Joe. I'm going to bring him into the company. And, we were able to it was it was complicated for our HR person because they had to learn a lot of different states' HR rules. But at the end of the day, it attracted people. And so, that little vignette there story is there's always going to be a competition for good talent. And while it will ebb and flow, depending on business cycles, there's more people probably out in the job market right now than there have been in years past. That talent is going to go to places and aggregate where there are good reputations, and you're not going to hold people for long. It's too easy. And especially as, again, when you think about the factors that fall into this mind, you're like, well, there's a generational switch happening. People are not going to be inclined to stay at a job where they don't feel like their needs are being met. They're more apt to move than maybe generations before.
Yes. Interesting you bring up that you were a virtual company a couple decades ago, and now we're seeing post-pandemic where companies were able to switch to virtual, and certainly bumps in the road, but were able to function. And now the pendulum is swinging back to let's bring people back in the office. And I might be biased as someone who doesn't work in an office. It feels like in some ways that's anti-people.
Yeah, and I've followed this return to office pretty closely because it flies in the face of the experience that I had. And I'll be honest, like, these are I always like I brought up, I think, the example of the pendulum. There is a swing that always happens, and it's almost impossible to pinpoint when the pendulum is at its equilibrium or its, like, lowest point. So I will say this, and this I feel strongly about, is there will be a swing back and there is a push for return to office. And there's a lot of that. There's the old command and control mentality that's still in a lot of organizations. There is a huge component that's commercial real estate, that what do we do with these big empty offices that nobody knows what to do with? But I don't think we are ever going to go back to a 9 to 5 in an office environment 5 days a week. I think there will be some level of flexibility and hybrid, and there will be a whole lot of workforce people that we may go back and you may see an uptick in return to office, but I have a feeling it'll keep swinging back. And I'll give you the counterpoint. When I was talking to one of my senior leaders when we were completely virtual, there were points where we were saying, hey, it would be great to be face to face and hang out in an office together. And we had an office for meetings and like a very not a huge space, and we would get together there maybe 3 4 times a month to hash out some things that were always good to be around a table for. So it's not like you can do everything remotely as well either. So I think there is an equilibrium that we'll find. There is post pandemic, there is a huge focus on care, like family care. I think that having flexibility, and one of my colleagues in coaching talks a lot about the sandwich generations of taking care of kids and seniors, and having a little bit more flexibility allows you to handle those life challenges. And I'll be honest, like, I don't know that when I was really working that if I was on my free time, I was still kind of at work at times. I was still thinking about it. So it's a balance, and it's like we said in the beginning of this call. It's a balance and a calibration that you have to find your happy spot on.
Yes, absolutely. And just to your point of when you're working for yourself and you're working, is also making sure that as the employee, if you are working from home, hybrid or fully remote, that you're not always thinking about work, like for your own health and well-being, to have those boundaries for work. And I know people struggle with that as well, kind of regulating their own schedule when they don't go into an office.
Yeah, and it's funny. I when I first was doing this, and this is now going back to the year 2000, I had to actually trick myself so that I would put on a pair of shoes in my house and tie them, and that was the mental switch that I'm at work. And I kept my shoes on all day, and then I took them off when I was like, when I was done work, and that was like also the mental eject button that I'm not there anymore. Because yeah, it would be real easy to drag work all night long if you're just sitting in your office, especially for people that maybe don't have other outside interests. Like at that time in my life, I was single, I didn't have kids, and I was probably a little bit of a workaholic, but it helped.
Yes. At the beginning of the pandemic, I remember people talking about, oh, now I can work in my pajamas and I'm on the Zoom call. I've got the suit jacket on the top and the running shorts on the bottom, or whatever the version was. But people talking about working in their pajamas, because I still got up every morning and got dressed. Now, I wasn't putting on a suit because I work from home, but putting on real pants and shoes and a real outfit, because like you're saying, that was my indication I am now at work.
Yes. It's that little mental trick. You almost have to throw that switch.
Well, Rob, we are almost at the end. Just to wrap us up, what is giving you hope right now?
There's a lot of stuff in the world that is challenging, but I look around and I always think about a quote from Mr. Rogers. I mean, this is going to sound really, really hokey, but his mother used to tell him whenever there was something going wrong in the world to look for the helpers. And you can see that terrible tragedy last night with the plane crash in DC. There were people that sprung into action that immediately went to help those that situation of those people. And so things like that really inspire me, that in the dead of night, in the cold weather, there are people out there trying to help others. And that to me is really like, there's a lot to bring you down, but those kinds of things really are inspiring.
I agree. Absolutely. Now, before we wrap up, Rob, tell our listeners a little bit about what you do and how they can reach you and learn more about you.
Thank you. So I am now a consultant and an executive coach. I run a company called Ott Management Solutions. It's a solopreneuring type of organization. And I focus on helping small companies set up their business operations to help them establish infrastructure. That's the consulting side. And then I am also a leadership coach. So I will coach, people that are looking to advance their careers. Everyone has a challenge, problem, or opportunity in front of them. And there are certain areas that I am really good at helping surface those areas and set up plans for them to improve and develop. And you can reach me at, I'm on LinkedIn, Rob Ott. Then you can also reach me at Ott Management Solutions. It's ottmgt.com. And there's a lot of material in there as well about my background and my services. So thank you for having me on that. And thank you for that opportunity.
Wonderful. We'll put links in the show notes to make it easier for folks to get a hold of you. And Rob, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed our conversation.
Yeah, it was a true pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. I'm Manya Chilinsky. I help organizations build compassionate, resilient teams that thrive by creating environments where well-being is at the core. Often people reach out to me during times of crisis or significant change, but the truth is that building a healthier, more supportive workplace can prevent issues before they arise and empower your teams to thrive no matter what challenges come their way. If you're ready to make a meaningful change, I'd love to connect. If you haven't already done so, please subscribe, rate, and review the podcast on Apple Podcast or your listening platform of choice. It really helps others find us. And if you'd like to continue the conversation, connect with me on LinkedIn or visit my website, www.manyachilinsky.com. Thank you for being part of this journey with me.